19-year-old Lily lived in the vibrant heart of Charleston, South Carolina, where the warm coastal breeze and the sweet scent of blooming jasmine felt like a constant promise of a beautiful life. She was a girl defined by her radiant smile and a heart full of simple dreams, spending her afternoons sketching the historic architecture of the French Quarter or laughing with her lifelong friends until the sun dipped below the horizon. Lily believed in the kind of legendary love found in old novels, and when she met Julian at a local art gallery, she felt as though her real life had finally begun. Julian was older, sophisticated, and possessed an intense, magnetic charm that made Lily feel like the most important person in the universe. Their whirlwind romance was breathless and dizzying, and when he dropped to one knee on a moonlit pier after only a few months of dating, Lily didn't hesitate to say yes, convinced she had found her soulmate. The early days of their marriage felt like a golden dream, but slowly the sunlight began to fade from Lily's world as the walls of her new home started to close in. It began with small, seemingly protective comments about her safety, with Julian suggesting that the city streets were becoming too dangerous for her to navigate without him. He began to express a subtle, stinging disapproval whenever she planned a brunch with her bridesmaids or a weekend visit to her parents' house, claiming that his heart simply couldn't handle the void she left when she was away. Lily, blinded by her affection and her desire to be the perfect, supportive wife, rationalized his behavior as a sign of deep devotion. She told herself that his jealousy was just a byproduct of his passion, and she willingly began to trim the edges of her social life to keep the peace and maintain the harmony of their home. However, the protective walls Julian built around her soon transformed into the cold, unyielding bars of a cage. The gentle suggestions turned into hard prohibitions, and suddenly Lily found herself almost entirely cut off from the people who knew her best. Julian eventually confiscated her car keys under the guise of mechanical issues that were never fixed, and insisted on vetting every text message and phone call she made. He told her that a truly devoted wife had no need for outside influences or the distractions of friends, arguing that she should find total fulfillment within the four walls of their suburban estate. When Lily tried to argue that she missed her freedom and her sense of self, Julian's charm vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, simmering aggression that left her trembling in the kitchen. She realized with a sinking heart that his protection was actually a calculated campaign of total isolation and psychological control. Fear began to take deep root in Lily's soul, replacing the vibrant joy that had once defined her personality. She stopped fighting back because Julian's outbursts became increasingly unpredictable and frightening, often involving him slamming doors or towering over her until she felt small and helpless. He would tell her that she was too fragile for the real world, and that only he could keep her safe from the hidden dangers outside. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, while Julian was out on a supposed business errand, Lily reached a breaking point after finding her old passport locked in his desk drawer. With shaking hands and a racing heart, she threw a few essential belongings and some hidden cash into a backpack, intending to find refuge at her best friend Sarah's apartment across town. She slipped out the back door and began to run down the sidewalk, her breath coming in ragged gasps, feeling a desperate, fleeting sense of hope as she reached the end of their quiet street. That hope was brutally shattered by the low, predatory growl of a powerful engine as a black SUV with heavily tinted windows swerved toward the curb, tires screeching as it blocked her path. The door swung open and Julian emerged, his face a mask of cold, terrifying fury, flanked by two of his friends who were dressed entirely in black tactical clothing. Before Lily could even scream for help, They grabbed her by the arms and forced her into the shadows of the back seat, where the air felt thick with the smell of expensive leather and intimidation. Julian didn't say a single word as he slammed the vehicle into gear and pulled away from the curb, driving with a terrifying, calculated speed. Outside, the familiar streets of her childhood began to blur into long, ghostly streaks of white and yellow as the city lights flickered past the darkened glass. Lily pleaded with him, her voice cracking with pure terror, asking him where they were going and why he was doing this to her. She looked at the shadowed, silent figures of Julian's friends and felt a level of primal fear she had never known, realizing this wasn't just a ride back home, but a demonstration of his absolute power over her. Julian finally spoke, his voice a low, haunting whisper that chilled her to the bone, telling her that she was his property and that every attempt to escape would only result in a darker, more painful lesson. They drove far beyond the city limits, navigating through winding, desolate backroads and overgrown woods where the only light came from the car's high beams cutting through the midnight gloom. He wanted her to feel lost, to feel that no one could hear her screams in the wilderness he had chosen. The car moved like a predator through the night, splashing through deep puddles on forgotten dirt tracks as Julian lectured her on loyalty and the dangers of her disobedience. He made sure she saw how easily he could disappear with her, how his friends were loyal only to him, and how small she was in the face of his resources. When they finally arrived back at their darkened driveway hours later, the psychological weight of the journey had broken her spirit. Julian pushed her roughly inside the house and locked the door behind them, walking away to the kitchen to pour a drink without a single backward glance. Lily collapsed on the cold hardwood floor of the entryway, the silence of the house feeling heavier than any mountain. She sat there in the dark, tears streaming down her face, trapped in a life that had become a nightmare from which there seemed to be no waking up. The silence of the house was more suffocating than the arguments had ever been. After Julian left, the air felt heavy with the lingering scent of his cologne and the unspoken threats he had left hanging in the hallway. Lily sat huddled in the corner of the sofa, her body still vibrating from the adrenaline and the sheer terror of the night journey. When her phone buzzed on the coffee table, the vibration sounded like a gunshot. It was a video call from her mother. Lily took a deep breath, wiped her tear-stained cheeks, and forced her voice into a higher, cheerful register. She lied, telling her mother that everything was wonderful, that marriage was a dream, and that they were simply too busy with Julian's career to visit the family in Oregon. Hanging up felt like severing her last lifeline. The distance between her and her parents felt like thousands of miles of uncrossable ocean. She felt as though she had fallen into a deep, dark abyss with no ladder to climb out, facing a future where she would be nothing more than a ghost in a beautiful prison. But as the hours ticked by and the moon climbed higher, a cold, hard resolve began to replace the paralyzing fear. Lily looked at her reflection in the darkened window and didn't recognize the hollow-eyed girl staring back. She was only 19. The thought of spending the next 60 years in a state of constant submission was a fate worse than any lesson Julian could teach her. She realized that even if he had connections, even if his friends were watching, she had to gamble her life to save her soul. She would not be a trophy kept on a shelf, nor a bird in a cage built of threats and black SUVs. If she had to sacrifice her comfort, her home, and her past to find a future where she could breathe freely, she would do it without looking back. Knowing that Julian could return at any second, and knowing his pride would never allow her to leave a second time, she moved with a frantic, silent urgency. She remembered where he kept an emergency stash of cash in his mahogany desk, a place he thought she would never dare to touch. With trembling fingers, she pried open the drawer and grabbed the thick envelope of bills. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for a ticket to somewhere anonymous. She stuffed a few practical clothes and her drawing pads into a small bag, avoiding anything that would make her look like she was moving out. She slipped through the back door into the humid night, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every shadow looked like a black car. Every rustle of the wind sounded like Julian's voice calling her name. She began to walk, then power walk, and finally, she was sprinting down the suburban streets, her eyes darting back and forth in a state of total paranoia. She reached a distant bus stop just as a Greyhound was pulling in, its destination marked for a city hundreds of miles away in the Midwest, a place she had never visited and where she knew absolutely no one. She boarded the bus and sat in the very back, staring out the window as the lights of Charleston faded into the distance. She changed buses 3 times in 48 hours, hopping from city to city to throw off any potential trail Julian might try to follow. Only when she crossed the third state line did the crushing weight on her chest begin to lift. She finally arrived in a quiet, industrial city in Ohio, a place of gray skies and hard-working people where a girl like Lily could easily disappear into the crowd. The first few months were a blur of survival and shadows. Lily rented a tiny, drafty room above a bakery and found a job as a waitress in a local diner, using a name that felt like a shield. She lived in a state of hypervigilance, flinching whenever a black car parked across the street, or whenever a man with Julian's build walked through the diner doors. She was convinced she would never trust a human being again, especially not a man. She built a wall around her heart that was even thicker than the one Julian had built around her. Eventually, she gathered the courage to call her parents from a burner phone, weeping as she told them the truth of her marriage and her escape. They were horrified, their voices breaking as they realized the danger she had been in, but they agreed that for her safety, she should stay hidden and keep her location a secret even from them, communicating only through untraceable lines. A year passed, and the sharp edges of her trauma began to dull, worn down by the steady routine of an honest, independent life. Lily started to reclaim the parts of herself she thought were dead. She began to sketch again, and she allowed herself to join her coworkers for coffee after their shifts. Among them was a young man named Caleb, a quiet, observant carpenter who frequented the diner. Caleb was everything Julian was not: unassuming, patient, and genuinely kind. For months, they were simply friends, talking about books and the simple beauty of the changing seasons. Lily enjoyed his company because he never demanded anything from her. He never asked to see her phone, and he never made her feel small. Despite the growing warmth she felt when Caleb laughed, Lily kept him at a distance, terrified that any crack in her armor would lead to the same cycle of control she had barely survived. She told herself that they would never be more than friends, that she could never risk her heart or her safety on a happily ever after, ever again. She valued her freedom above all else, cherishing the simple act of walking to a grocery store alone or sitting in a park without permission. As she sat across from Caleb at a small cafe one afternoon, she realized she was finally living the life she had dreamed of. Not because she was a wife, but because she was finally herself. She didn't know if she would ever let someone truly in again, but for the first time in years, the choice was hers to make, and that was the greatest victory of all. The wall Lily had built around her heart didn't crumble all at once. It eroded slowly, worn down by Caleb's unwavering patience and the gentle way he looked at her. One evening, as the first autumn leaves began to dance across the pavement, Lily found herself sitting with him on a park bench, the air crisp and cooling. For the first time, the weight of her secret felt too heavy to carry alone. In a quiet, trembling voice, she told him everything. The gilded cage in Charleston, the terrifying night in the black SUV, and the constant, lingering fear that Julian's shadow would one day find her. She expected him to look at her with pity, or, worse, to be intimidated by the danger she carried, but Caleb simply took her hand. His grip was steady and warm, and in his eyes she saw not judgment, but a fierce, protective fire that made her feel, for the very first time, truly safe. As their bond deepened, Lily realized that Caleb was the first person who truly stood between her and the harshness of the world. With him, the evil world she had feared for so long seemed to shrink. She discovered that being with Caleb meant she didn't have to look over her shoulder anymore. It wasn't that he controlled her movements to keep her safe, but rather that his presence provided a sanctuary where she could finally be herself. She no longer feared Julian's old threats or the dark influence of his connections, because she knew that Caleb would stand as an unbreakable shield against anyone who tried to harm her. For the first time in her life, she understood that true protection doesn't come from locks on a door or confiscated keys, but from a partner who empowers you to walk through the world without fear. The realization was profound. She had finally found a love that breathed life into her instead of stifling it. She looked back at her 19-year-old self and realized how much she had misunderstood about the nature of devotion. She used to think Julian was her entire world, but now she saw that he was merely a storm that had tried to drown her. Caleb was the sunrise that followed. He didn't just love her. He inspired her to sketch again, to speak her mind, and to dream of a future that extended far beyond a single house. She learned that a person who truly loves you doesn't keep you in a state of limitation or fear. They celebrate your freedom and support your journey, standing beside you rather than over you. The trust she felt for Caleb was a revelation, a level of intimacy she hadn't known was possible. She could be completely sincere, showing him her scars and her triumphs without the fear of them being used against her. Together, they built a life founded on the bedrock of mutual respect and a deep, quiet joy that didn't need to be loud to be powerful. They moved into a small house filled with light and plants, a place where the doors were never locked out of fear, but out of a simple desire for privacy. Lily finally understood that her worth wasn't defined by someone else's control, but by her own resilience and the love she chose to share. In the end, Lily didn't just escape a nightmare, she built a masterpiece of a life. Her relationship with Caleb became a testament to the fact that healing is possible and that real love is the ultimate protector. As they walked hand in hand through the city they now called home, Lily felt a sense of peace so profound it brought tears of joy to her eyes. She was no longer a victim running from the dark. She was a woman standing firmly in the light, protected by a man who cherished her soul and loved by a heart that asked for nothing but her happiness. She had found her true, happily ever after, and it was more beautiful than any storybook she had ever read.